Part 1. The Face in the Crowd. Some stories begin with a letter, some with a phone call in the middle of the night. Mine began at the farmer's market, between a stall selling wildflower honey and a man playing guitar under a blue tarp. I was picking out heirloom tomatoes when I saw her. She was standing across the market, speaking to a vendor with her back half turned. I couldn't see her face at first, only the tilt of her head, the curve of her cheek. But something inside me stopped. I dropped the tomato in my hand. She turned, and I saw her. My heart nearly stopped. It was Rachel. Only it couldn't be. Rachel had died 30 years ago. My name is Helen Montgomery. I'm 66 years old. I'm a retired elementary school teacher, mother of 2, grandmother of 3. I live alone in the same house I share with my husband, Martin, before he passed away 6 years ago. And for the past 3 decades, I've lived with the grief of losing my younger sister, Rachel Ann Whitaker. She was 27 when she disappeared in 1993. Vanished on a rainy Friday evening, her car found abandoned near the state forest. No signs of a struggle, no note. Police searched for weeks. Her purse was in the car, so was her engagement ring. 3 years later, she was declared legally dead. We held a memorial service without a body. I wore her favorite scarf. I gave a eulogy. I cried until I couldn't breathe, and then I kept living. But now, standing in the middle of the farmer's market, I saw her. Older, yes. Her hair was streaked with silver, her frame fuller, but the eyes, the chin, the smile that flashed briefly as she picked out a jar of honey. It was her. I blinked. She was moving away toward the parking lot. I abandoned my basket and followed, weaving between people and stalls. She reached a silver hatchback, put the bag in the passenger seat, and climbed in. I picked up speed. "Rachel!" I called. My voice was hoarse. "Rachel!" She paused, her hand on the door. She looked up. Our eyes met. And then she got in the car and drove away. That night I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling fan and replayed the moment over and over. Maybe I was mistaken. Maybe it was a woman who looked like her. But I knew my sister's face. I had stared at it in photographs and dreams for 30 years. In the morning, I dug out the last photo I had of Rachel. It was from Christmas 1992. She was laughing, wearing a red sweater, holding a mug of cider. I stared at it until my eyes burned. Then I opened my phone. I had taken a picture. It was blurry, snapped quickly while she turned to leave the market. But it was something. I brought it up beside the photo from 1992. The shape of the face, the eyebrows, the same small mole near her ear. It couldn't be coincidence. I called my daughter Lucy. "Mom," she said gently after I told her, "are you sure it wasn't just someone who resembled her?" "I know what I saw. It's been 30 years. Maybe you're wanting it to be true." "You think I'm losing my mind?" "No, Mom. I think you miss her. We all do." I hung up and stared at the photo again. The next Saturday, I went back to the market. Same time, same stalls. I waited by the honey vendor for hours. She didn't come. I returned the next week, and the next. On the 4th visit, I saw her again. This time, she wore sunglasses. Her hair was tied back. She bought lavender soap and bread. I didn't call out. I stayed back, took another photo, watched her drive away. The license plate. I wrote it down. I didn't go to the police. What would I say? "Hi, I think my sister faked her death and reappeared 30 years later, selling soap at a farmer's market?" They would think I was unstable, or worse. Instead, I went online. Search DMV plate lookup tools. Most were scams, but I found one that gave me a lead. A name, Marie Donovan. The car was registered just 50 miles from my house. I sat in my living room, with my hands shaking, staring at her photo, the address on my notepad, and the past cracking open beneath me. Rachel, Marie, whoever she was now, she had come back to life. Part 2, the search. It took me 3 days to decide what to do with the address. I wrote it on the back of an envelope and moved it from room to room. Kitchen counter, coffee table, nightstand. I'd pick it up, put it down, reread it. The name on the registration was Marie Donovan, and the house was located in a town called Pineview. I told no one. Not Lucy, not Michael, not my closest friend, Irene, who lived 3 doors down and knew everything from my blood pressure to my favorite casserole dish. This was mine. I arrived in Pineview on a foggy Thursday morning. It was the kind of quiet town where everyone waved at everyone else, where dogs weren't leashed and neighbors borrowed sugar without asking. The address led me to a single-story blue house with a small garden in front, neatly tended, blooming with yellow tulips. A white fence surrounded the yard, and wind chimes danced softly near the porch. It looked ordinary, and that somehow made it worse. I parked across the street and waited. An hour later, she appeared. She stepped onto the porch in jeans and a flannel shirt, a mug of something in her hands. Her hair was pulled back into a low ponytail. She looked older than the Rachel in my memories, but still unmistakably her. She sipped her drink, picked dead petals from a plant near the door, hummed. It was Rachel, but she wasn't. I came back the next day, and the day after that. On Saturday morning, I watched her leave with a reusable bag and come back 30 minutes later with groceries. She had a life here. She lived alone. No sign of a husband or children. I searched her name online. Marie Donovan had a small Etsy shop for handmade soaps. No social media. Just a phone number and P.O. box. No criminal record. No digital trace of a Rachel Whitaker. I stared at the house, unsure what I hoped to find. Answers, a confession, a reason. The 4th day, I parked closer. My car was across from her driveway. I watched as she stepped outside with a book, sat on the porch swing, and opened it. It was a paperback. I couldn't see the title. She looked up. Our eyes met. She didn't flinch, didn't look confused, didn't ask, "Why are you staring?" Instead, she closed the book slowly, set it beside her, and stood. I stepped out of my car. My legs trembled as I crossed the street. Her gaze followed me the whole way. My mouth was dry. I stopped at the base of her steps. She didn't speak. I swallowed. "Rachel?" She exhaled softly, then nodded. "I knew you'd come eventually," she said. We sat on her porch. The chimes tinkled behind us. She poured iced tea, and we sat in silence for a long time. "I go by Marie now," she said finally. "Rachel died a long time ago." I stared at her. My chest ached. "Why?" I asked. She looked down into her glass. "Because I had to." She told me her story in fragments, like puzzle pieces she couldn't yet connect. Her words were calm, deliberate, like she'd rehearsed them many times in her head, but never aloud. In 1993, the night she disappeared, she was planning to leave her fiancé, David. Most people thought they were happy. They weren't. "He controlled everything," she said. "What I wore, who I saw, when I could go out. He never hit me, not with fists, but he didn't have to." She had tried to leave before. He found her every time. So she planned carefully, quietly. She saved cash, bought a used car under a fake name, left her things behind, parked near the forest, and walked to a prearranged ride. I made it look like I was taken, she said. I knew the car would be found. I thought if they believed I was dead, he'd stop looking. You let me think you were dead, I whispered. She flinched. I'm sorry. I wanted to call you every day, but I was scared and ashamed. I didn't want to ruin your life, too. I shook my head. You didn't ruin anything. You broke my heart, but you didn't ruin me. We sat for hours. I asked questions. She answered some, not others. She told me about the jobs she had over the years: waitress, library assistant, florist. How she changed her name legally in 1998. How she built her new life piece by piece. Do you think about coming back? I asked. Every day, she said. But how do you come back from the dead? You just did. When I left that day, she walked me to the gate. Can I come back? I asked. She nodded. I think I'd like that. As I drove home, the grief I'd carried for 30 years began to shift. Not disappear, but change. It wasn't just pain now. It was possibility. My sister was alive, and I wasn't letting her go again. Part 3. The truth. It took Rachel 3 more visits to fully open up. She'd serve tea, talk about her garden, her soaps, her cat named Franklin. We danced around the real conversations, like circling a locked door neither of us had the courage to open. Then one afternoon, as we were weeding her flower beds, she said, "He almost found me twice." I looked up, startled. She didn't look at me. She was pulling out dandelions. "He came to my work once in St. Louis. I dyed my hair and quit the same day. Another time, someone mailed a photo to my P.O. box. It was me walking to my car. No return address." My stomach dropped. "Why didn't you tell the police?" Because I wasn't Rachel Whitaker anymore. I didn't exist, and Marie Donovan didn't have a past. Her ex, David Bell, had moved on. Publicly, he remarried, became a real estate broker in another state. But she didn't trust it. He was charming in front of others, always. But alone, he was cold, possessive, controlling. When I laughed too loud at a friend's joke, he wouldn't speak to me for a week. When I wore a dress he didn't approve of, he threw it away. She paused, brushing dirt off her hands. I knew he'd never let me leave if I asked, so I disappeared. It was the only way. I wanted to argue, to tell her she should have come to me, to someone, to the police. But the look in her eyes stopped me. She had lived the consequences. She had survived them. "You didn't just disappear from him," I said gently. "You disappeared from me." She nodded, and that's the part I regret most. She showed me a wooden box from under her bed. Inside were keepsakes, old letters, photos of our childhood, a pressed flower from Mom's garden, even a photo of me and Martin from our wedding. "I watched you from a distance," she admitted. "You were happy. I didn't want to ruin it." "You wouldn't have ruined anything," I said. "You were my sister. You still are." We cried. 30 years of silence, broken. She agreed to meet Lucy. My daughter was cautious, but kind. They had lunch on my back porch. Rachel told her she remembered holding her as a baby. "You were wearing the tiniest pink socks," she said. "Your mom let me sing to you, even though I couldn't carry a tune." Lucy smiled. "I guess I forgive you then." A month later, Rachel came to our family picnic. My grandchildren loved her instantly. She brought handmade soap shaped like animals and won them over. Everything felt fragile, but full of hope, until the letter arrived. It came in a plain white envelope. No return address. Inside was a single photo. Rachel, sitting on my porch. The message written across the back: "Found you." She dropped it as if it burned her fingers. We went to the police. They said it was likely a prank, that after 30 years it would be hard to prove harassment. We pressed for more. Eventually, they linked the handwriting to a known associate of David's. He had remarried, yes, but he had also divorced again. And recently moved back to the state. Rachel was visibly shaken. He never stopped watching. I held her hand. "Then he needs to know you're not alone anymore." We filed a restraining order. A detective visited David's new office. He denied everything, of course. But we weren't waiting for his approval. We got a lawyer. We started building a case to restore Rachel's identity legally, her real name, her right to live in peace. I stood by her through every form, every painful retelling. It wasn't easy, but it was happening. She was reclaiming her name, her life, and her place in our family. Part 4. The Reckoning. We sat in the lawyer's office, surrounded by stacks of paper and stale coffee. Rachel's hands were trembling as she signed the first official document restoring her identity. Rachel Ann Whitaker. "Welcome back," I whispered. She smiled, tight, nervous, hopeful. It had taken 3 months of petitions, affidavits, legal fees, and meetings. The state had questions. So did the press, once word leaked. But we held our ground. David was furious. He sent a letter through his attorney demanding she stop using her former name. He claimed she was mentally unstable. He accused her of fraud. But he made a mistake. He showed up at her property late one night. He didn't step onto the porch, but he stood by the fence, smoking, watching. Rachel called me, her voice shaking. I called the police. Thanks to the restraining order, it was enough. They arrested him for violating the order. While it didn't lead to jail time, it sent a message. She was not alone anymore. Rachel changed after that. Not overnight, but gradually. Her shoulders straightened. She began leading the house more often, volunteered at the local library, started teaching soap-making classes to women at the community center. She laughed more. She cooked with me. We went on walks. She joined my church choir, even though she still couldn't carry a tune. At Thanksgiving, she stood next to me in the kitchen, stirring gravy and humming. "I forgot what normal felt like," she said. "This is our new normal," I told her. In the spring, Rachel stood in front of a courtroom. She gave a statement during a hearing to make her legal restoration public record. She said, "For 30 years I lived in hiding. I changed my name, my face, my story. I did it to survive. But today, I'm standing in the truth. My name is Rachel Whitaker. I am not invisible, I am not ashamed, and I am not alone anymore." The judge nodded, approved the petition. When we walked out of the building, Rachel took a deep breath and said, "It's over. Finally." Lucy invited her to speak at a local women's safety seminar. Rachel hesitated, but eventually agreed. She stood in front of a room of strangers and told her story, not as a victim, but as a survivor. Women came up to her after, some crying, others thanking her. One woman said, "Because of you, I think I can finally leave." That night, we sat in my backyard, sipping tea. The stars were bright. The garden bloomed around us. "Do you think Mom and Dad would be proud of me?" she asked. I looked at her, at the sister I had grieved, then found again. "They would be proud of the girl you were, and the woman you became." She wiped her eyes, smiled. We took a family photo that summer, all of us. Me, Rachel, Lucy, Michael, the grandkids, even the dog. I printed it and framed it, put it on my fireplace. People ask about it sometimes. They point to Rachel. "Who's that?" I tell them. "That's my sister. She disappeared once, but now I'm never letting her go again." The end.